I'm Cullen Lucas, and these are DUOS, the mini podcasts where I talk to composers and artists about their music in a straightforward, interesting, and accessible way. Think of us as the anti-program note. So today, for our very first edition of DUOS, we have Dr. Mark Alpizar, who is the newly appointed music director of the Vermont Youth Orchestra Association. I think I got that right. I've known Mark for a really long time. He's a super interesting guy. And so he's here today to talk about the composer Miklós Rózsa. And just ever since me and Mark were in grad school and he first kind of like put me on the Miklós Rózsa like path, I've just been fascinated by his story and all the ins and outs of his different music and how it's all come to play. And I just found out about some of his chamber music and arrangements people have done for chamber ensembles of different sizes. So I thought this would be a great place to kind of jump off. And so, Mark, why don't you just kind of jump in and give us your little like musical bio, what you do, who you are, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm very happy to, of course, announce that, yes, I have been appointed the music director of the Vermont Youth Orchestra Association. So nice shout out there. Woohoo! And before that, I was instrumental faculty at Lake Erie College in Paynesville, Ohio, and also the assistant conductor of the Cleveland Pops Orchestra. And before that, had a couple of other professional assistantships at the American Youth Symphony, the Long Beach Symphony, and the American Youth Symphony as well. So that was sort of my pathway. And before that, grad school with you, of course, at Arizona State University for a doctorate, where I studied mainly Rózsa and his concert music. And then my master's and undergrad at California State University before that. And my area of focus was, of course, clarinet performance, instrumental conducting, opera conducting. And my area of research was, again, Rózsa, but that was more based on his film music at that time.
So obviously, like, I know a little bit about Rózsa just from having worked so closely with you, and you've done a ton of work with him. But for people that might not know who he is, or at least, just kind of a passing familiarity, can you just give us a little background, who he was, why we should know about him, anything about his music in particular that kind of like jumps out at you?
Sure. Let me see. I'll try not to go down too big a rabbit hole here. So, so he was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1907. And then he did his undergraduate studies at conservatory in Leipzig, Germany, at the conservatory there. And Leipzig at the time is where Breitkopf and Härtel, the publishing company, was. And so he actually got, when he was 17, his first few pieces, chamber pieces that he'd done, published at the age of 17. So he had a very, very early start. And he outgrew Leipzig, and his teachers, especially his composition teacher, Grabner, said, you should go to a bigger city where you're going to have more exposure. So the first place he went was to Paris. And so he would put on joint recitals with another composer, most people have probably heard of Arthur Honegger. Yeah, so Arthur Honegger at that time was composing for films, but he didn't really talk very much about it with Rózsa. And so they said, let's get together and let's put on a couple of recitals together and get our chamber pieces out there. And, so they weren't really making very much money off of their chamber pieces. And Honegger at the time was composing in his own studio. Like he would live separate from his wife, and his wife would live in their house. And then he would only go and live in his apartment to complete his, where he had all his music and he had his piano and he had his sketches and he had all his primary resources. So he would sort of compose, like sequester himself and write this music. It's very like Mullerian, And so Rózsa eventually asked him, we're putting on these recitals and we're barely breaking even. How are you making any money? Like, how are you doing it? And Honegger was like, well, I'm actually composing film scores, for movies on the side. And Rózsa was doing everything that he could on the side already. Like he actually went under a pseudonym of Nick Tomei, and he was writing the elevator music that you would hear as you're like walking under the marquee at the movie theater or whatever. And he wrote song after song after song after song, and pop song after pop song after pop song under this name Nick Tomei. And so he was just at his wit's end. And so when he found out that Onager was composing for films, he sort of had this like interesting bias against it that sort of jumped out. He was like, "Oh, you mean you like compose foxtrots? You know, like that was so bad. You know, like, oh, musical theater or something. Ew." So Onager was like, no. I actually have a film that's premiering tomorrow, and you should come see it. And it ended up being one of the first movie adaptations of Les Mis. And so Rózsa heard it, and afterwards he was just so excited. He was like, "That sounded just the same quality, artistic quality as the stuff that you normally write, dude. I want to do that." And so he said, "Well, okay, I'll put you in touch with some people that I know." And eventually this led him down the pathway of scoring his first couple of pictures. Then through a chance meeting, he met three brothers named the Korda brothers, and they are also of Hungarian descent. And they said that they would try to use him for some of his pictures, or some of their pictures. And so he moved to London, where they were based at the time, and did several pictures for the Korda brothers until war broke out in World War II, and he was in the middle of working on one of their finest masterpieces, which is basically the Aladdin story from Scheherazade. It's called The Thief of Baghdad. So they moved production of The Thief of Baghdad when war broke out to the United States. They moved it to Hollywood. So Rózsa decided to go to Hollywood, and he loved it so much that he never left. So that's how he got there, and that's what got him into scoring music for films. And he naturally, I think, gravitated toward it because a lot of the music that he wrote already sounded super dramatic. Like one of his finest pieces in terms of his concert repertoire is his 13A, which is called Theme Variations and Finale. And revisions were done by him and also with the help of Onager, because he wrote it during his Paris time. And it's called, that's his Opus 13A. And a lot of that music ended up being used because it already had such a dramatic scope to it. Started being used in like the early Superman show, and it made its way into a bunch of other places. And that's because, it already had that sort of dramatic scope and focus to it. So I think that it lent itself beautifully to films and things like that. So, eventually he got a job at Universal Pictures, and then he got his big break where two jobs just about at the same time. He started teaching film composition at USC. And apparently that was the very first film scoring class that was in this country. So that's kind of historic, and that's at the University of Southern California, I should clarify. And then he also became the head of the music studio at MGM. So basically he was the one that looked at the list of pictures and assigned orchestrators and decided who was going to score which pictures. So he had the pick of the litter. So, in the 50s, he did a lot of these huge epics like Ben-Hur and El Cid. And for some, like King of Kings, like all these huge mega blockbusters. And of course, those are super dramatic and intense scores, and everything sounds like majestic. And he was so good at writing all of that stuff. And it's been imitated, even John Williams uses a lot of the same sort of tonal tricks and harmonic tricks. Kind of like a neo sort of version of what was going on back then. It's really interesting. So, and Rózsa was really, really dedicated to his art in that way. Like if he was doing El Cid, for example, he's like, well, I wonder what the music in Spain sounded like at that time. So MGM would pay for his flight, and he would go to Spain, and he would live there, and he would learn as much as he possibly could about the Spanish people. And he would be in the libraries during the day, and he would be out, in the bars or eating dinner at night and meeting the people and learning the language and really sort of trying to immerse himself in that culture before he even wrote a bar. And so I just found that to be like really, really awesome. I mean, he was not a music historian specifically, but I mean, he took his work very, very seriously. And I think that's why he accumulated dozens of, Academy Award nominations. And he won in 1946 1945 for Spellbound, and 47 for Double Life, and then 53 for Ben-Hur. I mean, he earned his accolades that way.
Thanks for joining us for the first part of our interview with Mark. Be sure to stay tuned for the second half coming soon.